We are living in a time when rest is very often elusive, isn't it? And the demands on us as women and as moms, they just keep us hustling like 24/7. But y'all, I'm here to tell you there is a better way. And it wasn't invented by a scientist or the latest how-to guru. It is a rhythm that God himself put in place and set into motion long before the digital age was even a thought. So if you today are desiring a way to just slow down, to reset, to find rest for your body, your mind, and your spirit, you are in the right place. Here in episode number 93, Jody Allen and I are going to be unpacking the practice of Sabbath. And you may be surprised at what it is and what it is not. So, listen in to today's episode of Unperfect. I'm Shelly.
I'm Jody.
I'm so type B, they should probably rename it type Z.
And I am absolutely type A.
I could pretty much live on chips and queso.
My kryptonite is ice cream.
I'm married.
I'm single.
I've got 4 kids.
I have 1 set of twins.
I stink at self-discipline.
I stink at parking my car.
I am the epitome of unperfect.
I'm an unperfect perfectionist.
But we both love Jesus. So, guys, our listeners here, if you only knew what it took for us to get on here, like we've been on our respective laptops for 47 minutes trying to make technology work. We need a Sabbath now to recover from.
Yes, we do.
To recover from our issues. Oh my goodness. And I already gave you issues a few weeks ago when you were in town and we went on a walk. Are your pinky toes better?
Oh, Shelly, my pinky toes are finally better, but this is what I want to say to everybody. If you need somebody to give you directions, don't ask Shelly Sneed. I was in Asheville where Shelly lives for a retreat. And I said, well, let me just have lunch with Shelly. So we had lunch. And then I said, let's go get some ice cream. So Shelly quick pulled up on her phone an ice cream place. So it's only half a mile away. No problem. I have on boots. She does not have on walking shoes. We walked the half a mile there. It's not a place to buy ice cream. It's like was it a distribution center for ice cream? Is that what it was?
Or a catering, I don't know.
Oh, my word. So then we walked the half a mile back to the restaurant. And then, well, we still didn't get ice cream. So Shelly said, oh, well, this is the actual place right here, which was almost a mile away. So we walk another mile to get ice cream, which was ever so small. And I said, Shelly, before we can walk the mile back, I'm going to have to get Band-Aids to put on my toes. So then we stopped at the grocery store. We sat in the parking lot and put Band-Aids on our feet so we could walk back. Yes, finally, my feet have recovered.
Yeah, that was not my best hospitality moment. I will say that. But we have recovered.
Had a good time.
We did have a good time. So we're going to jump into a topic today, and I think it is so needed, especially for those of us who struggle with, hard things here in the now and the not yet that we talk about a lot on this podcast. Because I think and I guess I should only speak for myself, but I really think we as a society really stink at stopping working. And I found this, I thought it was hilarious story from a sports medicine surgeon. And it was a conversation between he and a patient. And this is how it went. So the doctor said, I have good news and bad news. And the patient says, okay. The doctor says, the good news is this is a simple MCL sprain and it will not need surgery. But the bad news is it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks to heal on its own. So the patient says, so I can still go snowboarding, right? No, it will stretch the ligament while it's healing and make the process take longer. Well, what if I just go really slow? It's kind of the same issue. Snowboarding stresses the ligament. What about skiing instead? Not really, same issue. What about, I think you're missing the point. And I just had to laugh when I read that because I feel like that's such a great example of this hustle culture that we live in. That I think we all just pride ourselves on how productive we're being and how fast paced we're moving. And, even when we're complaining, we're kind of bragging about how many things we, burn the midnight oil to get done or whatever. But I just think Sabbath is one way to kind of break through that bondage, which is what I think it is. I don't think we were created to rush through life that way. So Jody and I have both been practicing Sabbath, but we've been studying about it too to get ready for this podcast. And one thing I learned was that the word Sabbath actually means to cease. And I think I always thought it meant to rest, but the only time it's used meaning to rest is when it's simply used in scripture to imply rest from work. So we're not talking about taking a nap once a week, though that is something that often happens on my Sabbath. But we're talking about just having a day that truly feels different than the other 6, where we have stopped working, kind of letting ourselves take a breath and really just be in the moment. So I would love, Jody, if you would just start us off with talking about a little bit about the origin of Sabbath, because I think a lot of us think, oh, it's one of the 10 commandments, and that's when it came about. But can you just kind of clear that up for us?
Well, Sabbath is, one of the 10 commandments. It is the 4th commandment, which God uses 4 verses to talk about Sabbath in the 10 commandments, which is the most verses that he uses in all the commandments. But that's not the first mention of Sabbath in the Bible. Genesis 2 talks about God resting on the 7th day. And I'm going to read verses 2 and 3 to you from Genesis 2. By the 7th day, God had finished the work that he had been doing. So on the Sabbath day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the Sabbath and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So God practiced the Sabbath long before the 10 commandments. He set into motion a rhythm for all of mankind, that we work 6 days and then we rest on the 7th day. So Sabbath is rooted really in who God is and not what he tells us to do. So it originated with God and not the 10 commandments. And if we are like God when we observe the Sabbath. But also this rest time, the Sabbath, the 7th day, was created in the Garden of Eden before the fall, before sin entered the world. So Sabbath really is God's original design for our perfect lives. And he knew that humans would need rest. And just like we turn off our phones or we turn off our laptops to reset them, we need a reset. And that's what the Sabbath gives us. It gives us a reset.
I love that. And that's so funny that we both, during this process of trying to get on this podcast, had to restart our computers.
We did.
So our laptops needed a Sabbath before we could start talking about Sabbath. Yeah, I love that. And you were talking about in the garden, and I think I thought that work came about because of the fall, but man had been given work to do before they ever sinned, because it was their job to preserve the garden and to take care of it. So I think the fall probably made our work a lot harder, and then probably sin and our flesh gives us that natural tendency to want to just overwork. But something else I learned, that word, when you were talking about God, the work of creating that he had done, like that word is literally translated business or occupation. Wow. I just thought that was kind of cool, because I think I think God gives us so much in scripture to model, but we forget, we're like, oh, he's God. He's but it's like, no, God had a job for 6 days, an occupation, and then he rested on the 7th. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, so definitely the Israelites, talking about work, they knew a lot about working and overworking because they were slaves. I mean, they were slaves for hundreds of years. And sure. I just finished a Bible study. How Much More is the name of the Bible study by Lisa Harper. And she's talking about God's extravagant love. And so she talks about the Sabbath within the context of the Jewish culture. She writes, a Jewish slave's sole purpose in Egyptian culture during that era was to do the brutal backbreaking work, like mixing mud and straw to make bricks and hauling heavy stones in the oppressive Middle Eastern heat that their overseers didn't want to do. There was no such thing as a vacation day or a sick day. A slave's workday began early and it ended late every single day. And there was no clear light at the end of the tunnel for an Israelite slave during the Egyptian captivity. Their only practical hope was for a master who wasn't overly abusive. And Shelley, that was just their culture. That was their mindset. That was their existence for years and years. So for God to give them a day off, it was a gift to them. And it really just revealed God's characters, his great, and extravagant, really, his love for them, but not just his love, but also his care for people. And that really just includes us too.
Right.
So, Shelley, we talked about rest on creation, and we talked about Sabbath and the Ten Commandments for the Israelites. But what about today? Do you think that we should observe the Sabbath today?
That is a great question. And I know there are people on both sides of the camp. I said in my newsletter this week, you're damned if you don't. And then Jesus is our Sabbath and we're free from that. And I'm not sure I knew what I thought, but interestingly, this weekend I was at a retreat and we were looking at Romans 14 and we weren't even on this verse, but it stuck out to me. And then I started looking for some other scriptures from Paul. But this is Romans 14, verse 5. And it says, one man considers one day more sacred than another. Another man considers every day alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. And that kind of blew me away. And I think I've even read that verse before, but I never read it thinking about the Sabbath. And then again, Paul in Colossians 2:16 through 17, Paul says, therefore, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. So here's what I think, based on scripture, I think the short answer is no. I don't think we have to observe the Sabbath. However, I go back to what you said about God taking that first Sabbath as an important rhythm in his week in a perfect world that he wanted us to live in and engage in. And then when I look at Jesus, I mean, the only thing you see different that he was doing that was pretty radical on the Sabbath that the religious leaders were struggling with is he was serving others and healing or whatever. But you didn't see that he was breaking the Sabbath like blatantly in 100 different ways. I just think it has so many health and emotional benefits. I'm just kind of like, why would we not? Like, why would we not want to do this? So that's kind of where I'm landing. What about you, Jody?
Well, I kind of lean toward the camp of yes, and not in a legalistic way, but that we should observe the Sabbath simply because that is what God modeled for us. That was the pattern, that was the rhythm that he modeled for us in the creation narrative. And that's when the world was perfect. And I feel like Sabbath is really God's invitation to us to return to what we were made for. And besides that, stopping and resting just makes our life better. My son is a big NASCAR fan, and they go around 200 miles an hour around a circle for a really long time, but they have pit stops. They get new tires and they get gas, and that just makes them go further. And I think the same is true for our bodies. When we rest, we can just go further. Not that that's our end goal, but it just gives our body rest.
Yeah, it's like a byproduct.
Right. And, you mentioned about health and emotional benefits of the Sabbath. What are some of those? Okay.
So interestingly, there are a lot of studies, and these aren't just studies that have been done by Christians, trying to prove how healthy Sabbath is. These have been done in businesses and workplaces and that kind of stuff, but shown that you actually are more productive during the week if you take a Sabbath of some kind once a week, that you tend to rest better during the week. And then some studies even show that you will live longer, which I thought was really crazy. There was this study done of these blue zones, like places all across the earth where people were living longer than the normal life expectancy. They called them the blue zones. And one of them is Loma Linda, California, which has a very high percentage of Seventh-day Adventists. And it's known for its residents' longevity. Now, I have some good friends that are Seventh-day Adventists. They also have much more healthier diets than we do and some other things that could probably attribute to this. But I know that the Sabbath day, they practice it on a Saturday, is a day of rest and delight and community and worship. Like it's nothing like we have made our Saturdays or Sundays, here in the rest of of the world. So I also think we get the spiritual and emotional benefits of just disconnecting from the rat race, that hustle culture. I don't know why I can't say that today. Hustle culture that we're in. I just think that's draining. There have been days where, like my daughter goes to school. She's in cosmetology school, and she's there from 8 to 4. And then right now she's taking a math class twice a week. Oh Lord, please let us get through this semester, because the math class is from 6 to 8:45. And this is just 2 nights a week. But one of us, my husband or I, will just take a laptop and go get work done. But I find when I get to the end of that day, like, it's almost depressing, because it's like all I did today was work. You know what I mean? Like there's something about that is very draining. And then just the benefit of taking a day or an afternoon or whatever it is that is your Sabbath to focus on just delight and rest and family and worship and serving others. It's something that makes it drastically different from any other day of the week. I just think there's so many benefits for us.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about some kind of out there things. Let's talk about some personal things too. I would love to know, Jody, how you personally practice the Sabbath.
Honestly, I go through seasons of being really diligent about the Sabbath, and then there are other seasons where I'm less intentional about it. But there's one thing that I really don't like to do on the Sabbath, and that is cook. I am just not a fan of cooking.
Same.
My children want to eat, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to have to cook for you. But when they were younger, after church, we would have a quesadilla, or we would have grilled cheese for dinner or something like that, because it was simple and it was just less work. But Sabbath for me has looked different in different seasons. When I grew up, were you talking about blue zones or blue days that we were talking about? When I grew up, there were blue laws. I don't know if you had that where you lived. But there are certain things that you couldn't buy on Sundays, and there are stores that didn't open until after church, or they just didn't open at all.
Right.
And so I grew up sort of in that era. And when my children were younger, we just did less activities on Sundays. We didn't have birthday parties on Sundays. We would go visit family on Sundays, which was a break for me because somebody else could chase the twins around.
Right.
But we would always do family bike rides, or sit on the front porch and watch them play in the cul-de-sac or play badminton in the backyard. But when my children were teenagers, I found myself more in the napping phase. I would read a little bit and then nap on Sunday afternoons. And our church had student ministry on Sunday nights. So my children would go to church on Sunday nights, and I would spend that time. At the time I was writing my book, and I would spend Sunday evenings writing. And this is what I found to be so fascinating. After resting on Sunday afternoons, I found that I was so much more creative on Sunday nights when it came to writing. I'd never thought that would be the case, but I guess my body and my mind were rested.
Right.
Currently, I'm on staff at my church, so I work on Sunday mornings, and our church office is closed on Fridays. So sometimes I'll take Fridays and I'll sleep late, I'll read, I'll nap, I just putter around my house, and I won't do anything productive. And here's the thing, I don't feel bad about it. Other days, if I do nothing productive, I feel bad about it, but not when I'm practicing Sabbath. If I don't do anything productive, it's okay. Sometimes I'll take a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday evening and Sabbath. And I think it's interesting the difference in the mindset about Sabbath on different days, because when I Sabbath on Fridays, I feel like I am resting from work. But when I Sabbath on Sundays, I feel like I'm resting for work.
Right.
Isn't that interesting? Well, what about you, Shelley? How do you practice your Sabbath?
Yeah. So, and some of the same things as you were saying too. It is a mindset shift, I think, because we think I'm not being productive. But I wonder where we started thinking that to take a break from working wasn't productive. You know what I mean?
Right. I guess we can't see fruit from it.
Yeah.
We can't see that we're rested. You know what I mean? So I guess in American culture, in the hustle culture, we don't have something to show for it.
Right. You can't analyze it. Yeah. So for me, I grew up much like you. Things weren't open on Sunday, but even when they were, we didn't go out to eat on Sundays because my parents didn't want to make people work. But I'm going to tell you, you want to know who worked? My mama, because we would have, but it was a joy for her. But my parents were in college ministry, and we would have probably, 5 to 10 college students over for lunch every Sunday after church, or people that were visiting, or missionaries, or whatever. Just, there were my mom always cooked a ton of food on Sunday. I am like you, though. I would rather chop off my leg than cook when I get home from church on Sunday. So it's funny that my husband, I wasn't even planning on sharing this, but any chance I get to throw him under the bus is always fun. For probably the first, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years of our marriage, every Sunday, and I'm like you, I was on staff at a church for a long time. And then even when I'm not on staff, I was, I volunteer. So Sunday mornings can be kind of busy. But on the way, without fail, on the way home from church, he would say, "So what's for lunch?" And this is what I would say every Sunday for probably 15 years, whatever you can find. Like, and then finally I just told him, I was like, "Do you realize we've had the same conversation 52 weeks a year I did not inherit that love of hosting 1,000 people over on Sunday like my mom did. But I love to cook on most days, but I try not to do. There's just something that I get to take a break from it on Sunday. And if my husband is listening now, he's like, "What about all those nights we have cereal for dinner?" But I do like to take a break from that, and it requires intentionality because you got to plan the day before or whatever. Because I still have 3 adult children living with me, so they hungry all the time. But also, sometimes it may be, usually what happens is my current Sabbath is I worship at my church. I love it. I go to our small group, which we also love, and kind of, help each other do life. And then I get home and I will usually curl up on the couch with a book, fire in the fireplace, and then eventually I will fall asleep. So I don't read as much as I'd like to because it puts me to sleep. But I just figure my body is taking the rest and recharge and healing and everything that it needs. But it's practicing the Sabbath that gives it permission to be like, if you need to check out, it is quite all right. And then sometimes Art and I'll do date night because Sunday night's just a nice night for us to do that. Or we'll do family things like you talked about the family bike rides. We'll play games with the kids, or we'll have a movie night or something. And then I will say this. Last week, I did something I've never done before, and I had to have conversations with my legalistic self to make sure it was okay. But my desk, Art and I were laughing at it the other day because his desk is if there's a pile, it's organized. Everything is organized, and my desk just looks like a paper company exploded on top of it and then throw in a bunch of other things that don't belong there and 8 coffee cups and whatever. And so he was laughing at my desk the other day. But last Sunday, I was like, you know what? I never stop to organize this. I just move the clutter. I'm going to do that today. And I was like, wait, I'm Sabbathing. I was like, and then I realized, you know what? This would bring me joy today because it's not something I usually do. It's not a task that I do during the week. And it will bring me life. It will be life-giving for me to get that. So I did it. We're recording this on a Thursday, and it has been straight all week.
Good job, Shelley.
I think that was God's way of blessing that, that I took that delight. So I think, if you enjoy weeding or planting flowers, that would be torture to me. That would not be a Sabbath. That would be torture to me. But what I don't do, so here's my final thing. What I don't do is anything work related for my podcast or blog or speaking ministry or writing. I those are the things that I decidedly say I'm not going to do that today because I want today to be different. And I do those 6 days a week. And so I am noticing too, and I'm not saying when you Sabbath, God's going to miraculously make the rest of your life work perfectly. But I'm just saying in the past, I've had nights where I'm up till midnight the night before a podcast releases because I'm taking that long to get it all done and edited and whatever.
Well,
that has not happened since I've been faithfully practicing Sabbath. And I just think that's kind of another way of God going, look, it's going to get done, but your body and your soul and your spirit need this time to Sabbath.
And he is the creator of time and the creator of our bodies.
Exactly.
So it would make sense that he would allow that to be.
Exactly. So those are the things we do for Sabbath. What do you think are some other ideas? Let's throw out some other things.
I do think there's some different ways that people can
Sure.
maybe even
Yeah.
celebrate or observe Sabbath. I do feel like you said, Shelley, that it should look different than the other days of the week, because the Ten Commandments, it does say to keep it holy, keep the Sabbath holy, which means to be set apart. So we do want our Sabbath to be set apart and to look different than the rest of the week. And I think maybe a couple of things that we can do. The first thing is maybe just a shift of mindset as we think about Sabbath in a fresh way, and think about it as freedom. Kind of like the Israelites, it was freedom for them from when they were in slavery. And we don't have to be a slave to our jobs. We don't have to be a slave to our phone. For me, I don't have to be a slave to my email. So if we can think about it as a mind shift, that it's freedom for us. And also another mindset shift is believing that the Sabbath is an act of trust, that I'm not
Mm.
God. I don't have to keep the world running. And if I take the day off, the world is really it's still going to keep going.
Right. Yeah, that's huge. And I would agree with that too. Just letting go of legalism and rigidity that surrounds the word Sabbath, especially for many of us that were raised in evangelical settings, or, where this felt more like a rule than, like you're saying, a celebration. I already mentioned that kind of what we did growing up. We didn't go out to eat or whatever, but I do remember my parents like making it a day when we did family devotions, and we would do Bible studies on Sunday, or we would go serve someone else. I didn't appreciate that when I was a kid or a teenager, but I remember several Sundays or Sabbaths where we would go and minister to somebody else. And so just kind of like what you were saying, that whole thought that this is a day of delight and freedom and even community.
Right. Sabbath, because Sabbath doesn't mean that you have to be by yourself. It can mean that, but you can enjoy Sabbath with your family or with other people. My daughter and I used to prop up a canvas on the kitchen table and paint together.
Oh, I love that.
That was
Yeah,
just
that's good.
refreshing for us.
I love that. And we have some friends, and one of the ways they practice Sabbath is by inviting other families over. And we have one, they will light a candle at the start of their Sabbath and leave it burning just as a visual reminder to cease working, and that this is a day to enjoy God and enjoy each other more fully, which I think is really cool. I'm still not convinced someone in my house won't burn the house down, but I do like that, having that. Maybe one day when we're completely empty nesters, we'll have that. No, I'll
Maybe.
forget to blow it out. We'll see.
That's funny. Well, I think on a practical level, I think practicing Sabbath for a whole day for somebody who hasn't really done that, it hasn't been part of their spiritual disciplines, that a whole day might be really too daunting for them. And
Yeah.
Annie F. Downs has done a lot. She has a lot of information on her website about Sabbath. And she recommends starting with maybe 2 to 3 hours per week and then working your way up to a whole day. So I feel like that might be a good way that people can kind of start with Sabbath, and so they're not overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I've even heard of people that started, which I think this was the traditional Sabbath, would be a sundown to sundown. So even think of it that way is, Friday night to Saturday night, or Saturday night to Sunday night. Then you can still kind of get your week together or whatever,
Right.
Sunday night if you need that time. For me, and another thing that I think people can do, I know in the past I've been glued to my phone or my laptop or an iPad. So I have very little digital rest. So even if you take that day or that time to step away from emails or social media or work related stuff. And, something you mentioned to me earlier this week is it is harder when you work from home. Those lines can get blurred. So you have to really be like, that's why I specifically say, if this is related to writing podcasts, those are the things I'm not doing today. I have to specifically say what things I'm going to take a rest from.
Yeah, I think boundaries are hard because I can relate to that since I, work from home too. And just this week, I find myself, because I'm an empty nester and my kids are off at college, and I find myself working at my kitchen table a lot, which means my work is always in front of me. So
Right.
and I couldn't figure out, my office it wasn't set up right. And so I never really worked in my office. And so this week I have shifted my desk around and moved all of my stuff in my office in hopes of having better boundaries with that, because I think boundaries are so important. And when I think about Sabbath, I think about things that bring refreshment, and work is not that, because we need a
Right.
break from that. And we can do things that refresh us. Maybe it is reading until we fall asleep, or painting like I used to do with my daughter, or gardening, or playing music. And Playing games. I don't know, but I love to play games. I love doing that with other people, or writing letters, or doing something that you don't ordinarily do. And if you work with your hands during the week, then maybe you could try to do something with your mind on your Sabbath. Or if you if you do a lot of manual labor during the week, maybe you might want to do something that's a little more mentally challenged, just to make that day different than the other days.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I think with all of these too, and I know I mentioned this earlier, I think we have to be intentional, because some of these arrangements need to be made the day before. And again, it doesn't matter if it's Saturday or Sunday or whatever. Being flexible about when you can do your Sabbath, but being intentional around it so that it is definitely something that's set apart.
And along those lines of being intentional, Shelley, your friend Sandy Cooper from the Balanced Momcast talks about a to-don't list.
Yes,
so
she
for
does.
Sabbath, you might want to make a list of things that you don't want to do on the Sabbath. Like you said, I mean, you don't work on your podcast or blogging or speaking stuff on the Sabbath. And for me, I definitely do not cut the grass on the Sabbath. I hate that so much. If I could pay somebody to do it, I would, but that is definitely on my to-don't list. And, making a to-don't list might actually be a great way to start practicing the Sabbath, because you're setting the boundary of, okay, I'm not going to do these things on the Sabbath. That might be a good way to start.
That is a great idea. I love that. As we're wrapping up here, Jody, what would be one last word of encouragement that you would leave with our listeners about this?
This is what I want to say, that Sabbath is a delight. Sabbath is not a duty. And it is an invitation from God, the one who loves us extravagantly, to step away from the chaos and to find rest and to draw closer to him. So I say, let's just accept his invitation and just see what happens.
That's good. That's really good. I love that. I would say it may not feel natural at first, because like you were saying earlier, it may feel like I'm not being productive, or I keep thinking of all these things I need to do. And you might even have pushback from yourself, but even your family. I know when we were studying Sabbath in our small group, some of the families had younger kids and teenagers and stuff, and just getting the whole family on board, they had some pushback there. So I just think you have to be patient and trust the process. Because I still think we're going to have this tension of wanting to experience rest, but wanting to be productive. And sometimes it's not even, for me, it's not trying to be productive. It's like wanting to catch up, because often most days I'm like weeks behind.
Right.
But when I choose to make this a rhythm or a discipline in my life, it's going to become a habit, and it's going to get easier. Like, I've been amazed at how much I look forward to it now, where before I think I would have been like, oh no, I can't. Because I really do enjoy working on podcasting and writing and everything else. It was more like, oh, I can't do any of that today. And now it's like, this is a Sabbath. It's refreshing.
Yes,
I would say. Well, I hope you, our listeners, have not only learned something new, maybe from our conversation today about Sabbath, but maybe you're already thinking of some ways to tweak yours or to put one into practice. Just know that none of the practices we're talking about are meant to be a burden, like Jody was just talking about, not a duty. They are to bring life to your soul. And right after Paul was getting onto the church in Galatia about their legalism, in Galatians 4, right after that in Galatians 5:1, he says, hey, remember, it's for freedom that Christ has set us free. So don't be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Don't let yourself get back under that. So I just want to leave you with that thought. And as always, we are praying that you're able to see glimpses of God's glory in the now and the not yet of your unperfect life this week. We'll see you next time.